Chapter 11. The Drake sisters' school break flew by in a flash. Their mother was too sick to see them off, so she bid them farewell from her doorway with a prayer for their safety. Their father was away in Chicago, leaving George Thorn to say goodbye to Laura as she boarded the train. As George made his way back to the steel mill, he made a resolution to use his evenings to further his education. The more he learned about iron ores and steel-making, the more he realized that he needed to master the subject to stay competitive in the industry. Laura and Kimberly traveled on the Empire State Express, the fastest train in the world, to New England. Laura secretly harbored feelings for George and decided to study chemistry and electricity to keep up with his studies. She hoped that if he ever asked her to be his wife, she could support him in every way possible. She saw in him the potential for greatness, a statue waiting to be carved. Too often, women and their mothers demand a finished product instead of being content with a work in progress. At Smith College, Laura's days were filled with study and excitement for the future. She and George exchanged letters every week, with Laura cautioning against too much intimacy too soon. She encouraged George to share more about his work at the steel mill, as she was eager to learn all she could. Laura was not interested in the latest societal trends, but rather in the welfare of her father's employees and their families, as well as George Thorn's plans. George, in turn, was eager to keep her informed and learn about her intellectual pursuits, including her reading and views on current topics. In her first letter to George, she referred to him as her coatless friend, a nod to the loss of his linen coat during their last ride at Drakeville. Their subsequent correspondence saw them addressing each other differently each time, with a gradual increase in warmth. Laura, an heiress, attended Smith College and resided in Morris Cottage among the apple tree blossoms. She spent much of her free time in the scientific library and laboratory of Lily Hall, or with the professor and his telescope in the observatory. On clear nights, she gazed into space through the telescope, marveling at the vastness of the world-making and the velocity of the giant dynamos in their elliptical pathways. She wondered if space was interlaced with electrical currents that move the Earth, sister planets, and countless suns and their planets, and saw the necessity for an eternal existence of the mind to study and know God in his infinite variety. Laura's 4 years in college developed her into a beautiful character. Her regular gym work, outdoor exercise, and ventilation in her room kept her in perfect physical health. Her presence at social events always brought sunshine and enthusiasm. On the Saturday before commencement, her mother and Kimberly came to enjoy the festivities. The class rented the Academy of Music for a representation of Racine's Athalie with Mendelssohn's music. Ushers conducted guests to their seats, and the stage and audience were equally impressive. Laura's mother and Kimberly were thrilled that she was graduating, and Kimberly, who had just finished her education in Boston, half regretted not attending a women's college. Laura looked stunning in her white robe as she passed down the aisle during the baccalaureate Sunday procession. George Thorn hurried to Northampton to witness Laura's graduation. As he arrived at the station, she warmly took his hand in hers. George had brought a box of white roses and a big bunch of English blue forget-me-nots for her room. He also had a tiny case in his valise that he kept secret from everyone. Hundreds of young women in white gowns were gathered on the college steps for their ivy exercise. George was never prouder of Laura. She and her friend Nellie Nelson had been chosen by the class to lead the procession of graduates due to their beauty and sweet personalities. The evening of class day marked the end of the festivities at Smith College. At the reception, George was introduced to many of Laura's classmates. Some of her close friends whispered that they must be engaged and would make a handsome couple. George offered his arm to Laura, and they walked around the campus under the glowing colored paper lanterns. Everywhere, there were happy girls with their friends and family. The glee clubs performed on the college steps, and refreshments were served, marking the end of Laura's college life on the beautiful Connecticut. She went to bed tired, but very happy. That evening, her mother and sister left for New York, and the next day, Laura and George were to spend the day at Mount Holyoke. Twice in the night, Laura woke up, looked at her watch, and longed for daylight, then went back to dreaming of flowers and music. While she slept, warm southern breezes spread a coverlet of silver-gray mist over the homes of energy and thrift up and down the Connecticut Valley. In the morning, when Laura opened the blinds, she saw the fog against the window panes and over the valley. She exclaimed, "It is too bad. I so wanted George to drive to Mount Holyoke today and see nature at her best. I hoped this would be the happiest day of my life." At 7:45, a pair of spirited black roadsters, hitched to a buckboard, were driven in front of the hotel for George Thorn. As he appeared on the porch, he looked every inch a gentleman. He was 25 years old, had received a practical education, and was filling the important position of assistant chemist of the Drakeville Iron and Steel Company, to which he had been promoted 6 months before. He had a fine physique, dark hair and eyes, and a military bearing that made him the natural commander of men. His firmness, tempered with great kindness of heart, always won the respect of both men and women. He handled the team with skill, as he was a member of the driving club at home. Laura eagerly watched for him from a college window and ran down the gravel walk with a sunny face to greet her manly lover with a sweet voice and grace. A college girl in passing whispered to her companion about the couple. "Behold, Bessie, there exist genuine and admirable lovers as we encounter in literature, but rarely in reality," Laura declared. Since the fog had lifted, she urged George to hitch his horses and accompany her to the college tower for 5 minutes. As they gazed out, Laura pointed out, "Here, George, to the west are our half-dozen snug college houses. Below you can observe our tennis courts and an abundance of shade on the smooth green lawn. Now, George, turn to the east and witness how the sun has kindly dispersed the fog to create a magnificent day. The colours in our flag that flutters over the high school yonder are so vivid. There stands the Soldiers' Memorial Hall, the Edwards Church with its graceful spire, and across the green meadows with its winding stream of silver rise the ranges of Mount Tom and Mount Holyoke, outlined in curves against the blue sky." "Exquisite!" George exclaimed. "Yet, Laura, nothing in nature is as lovely as your own dear self." Without warning, he kissed her rosy cheek, causing her entire face to turn crimson as she said, "George, we must depart." 2 joyous young souls drove away from Smith College, passing under the Gothic elms, where the birds were mating and constructing their nests. The plan for the day was to drive to the mountain and follow the mother and sister on the evening express to New York. The hotel clerk had indicated the best route to Mount Holyoke, and following his instructions, they drove southeast, leaving behind Northampton's shady trees, Smith College, and delightful memories of Jonathan Edwards, George Bancroft, and others. A single white parasol was sufficient to shield 2 lovers from the sun's rays. Circular shadows, photographs of the sun, played with each other in the roadway as gentle breezes swayed the overhanging boughs. Milk wagons with noisy cans were returning home. Herds of black and white Holstein Friesian cattle, renowned for their milk yield, were grazing on sweet grasses in the pastures. Farmers were guiding their cultivators and mowing machines, while wives and daughters were shelling June peas, hulling strawberries, and preparing for dinner. The large white houses, with roomy barns in the shade of big elms, were the contented homes of free men. Laura wanted the horses to walk more, but George was unwilling to take the dust of wagons returning from the market, so he kept the horses moving at a brisk pace. Eventually they arrived at the Hockenham ferry with its peculiar device. George got out and led the horses into the middle of the small river craft. Then the boat was pushed off, and a strong man and boy pulled at the wire rope. The ferryman's shanty, the willows, and tangled driftwood on the shore quickly receded, and soon the middle of the Connecticut River was reached, where the current is swiftest. In sight were several canoes with light sails darting before the wind. It seemed as if the tiny rope of the ferry would snap, but the rope was made of steel wire, and the boat moved slowly until the opposite bank was reached. Laura held onto the ropes, the sun shining brightly in her face, as she chatted with the boatman, George, and the horses. George remained quiet, busy calming down the excited animals and examining the primitive rope ferry. Laura gave Tim, the helper, an additional dime for watering the horses. As George prepared to leave, a 12-year-old boy came running onto the boat with a willow twig strung with a bunch of speckled trout. The boy had been eagerly anticipating his day off all spring, and he had spent his time walking up and down the brook, despite getting bitten by mosquitoes and having sore feet. But it was all worth it to him, as he had caught a string of fine fish and was overjoyed. Laura purchased the trout from the boy for $1, and he danced happily away. It was already 11:30 when they reached the halfway station up the mountain, and they took the steep incline railway up to Prospect House on top of Mount Holyoke. The morning ride and the prospect of a brook trout dinner on the mountain had made George and Laura ravenous. As soon as the clerk announced dinner, they rushed to grab seats for the inviting meal. They sat by an open window and relished every bite of their food. College was now over, and they were on the brink of starting their lives, away from the hustle and bustle of the world below. They walked along the spacious porch, taking in the breathtaking view. Charles Sumner, who had stood on Mount Holyoke in 1847, had said that he had never seen anything as stunningly beautiful as this. He had travelled through the Scottish Highlands, up and down the Rhine, climbed Mont Blanc, and stood on the Campagna in Rome. Laura, who had climbed Mount Holyoke with her college friends many times, was very familiar with this natural wonder in western Massachusetts. She described the magnificent landscape to her lover, who was enchanted by the view before him. "This alluvial basin," she said, "is 20 miles long and 15 miles wide, and is surrounded by the Mount Holyoke and Mount Tom ranges, as well as the steep cones of Toby and Sugarloaf, while the Green Mountains lie to the north, from where the rich soils have been brought by thousands of spring floods. The townships of Northampton, Easthampton, Southampton, and Westhampton, Hatfield, Williamsburg, and Whately, Hadley, Amherst, Leverett, and Sunderland are all marked by grove-like masses of elms. The Connecticut River, which turns 4 times to the east and 3 times to the west in 12 miles, forms the famous Oxbow. This beautiful river gets its life from the springs in the nearby forests and mountains, and after passing through the gap between Mount Holyoke and Mount Nonotuck, it flows south into Long Island Sound. Its banks are lined with a tanglewood of willows, shrubs, trees, and vines. As I gazed upon the vast expanse of lush meadows and fertile lands, unencumbered by fences, dotted with towering trees and orchards, and adorned with vibrant greenery, Laura's voice rang out like sweet music to my ears. She spoke of the countless farms that resembled garden plots, each distinguishable by the varying hues of vegetation, from the deep green of maize to the brilliant gold of barley, rye, and oats. The undulating fields were alive with the playful dance of cloud shadows, while grazing herds dotted the hillsides and valleys. Laura's words painted a picture so vivid and enchanting that it would forever be etched in my memory. The white gables, college towers, and spires that marked the historic towns in this idyllic valley seemed to point heavenward, revealing the secret of New England's power at home and abroad. The people's greatness, I realized, stemmed from their unwavering commitment to the virtues instilled in them by their schools and churches: honesty, industry, economy, love of liberty, and belief in God. It was a place that inspired poets, painters, and sculptors alike. As we stood there, taking in the breathtaking scenery, I knew that life without Laura would be a hollow existence. And so I took her hand in mine and professed my love for her. She, in turn, pledged her life and happiness to me, promising purity and loyalty for eternity. I presented her with a ring containing 2 diamonds and a ruby, which she accepted with delight. We vowed to move the crystal pledge to her 3rd finger as soon as we gained her parents' consent. Laura had also brought with her 2 unique emblems of our love: gold stars set with purple amethysts, one of which I pinned on her, while she gave me a gold cross set with an amethyst. As the sun set behind the western hills, casting a golden glow over the horizon, we knew that this happy summer afternoon would forever be a cherished memory. But the indistinct outlines of a gorgeous temple of fame loomed in the distance, reminding us of the unsatisfied ambitions and weary struggles that lay ahead. Yet, with Laura by my side, I felt ready to face whatever the future held. As the clock struck 12, the elated couple reunited with the matriarch and Kimberly in the bustling city of New York. By the end of the week, they had all journeyed back to their humble abode in Drakeville.